Welcome back to the harbor and happy Easter from your boys, Kino Cowboy, Scott Keith. Today we're talking about Jesus Christ himself.
Yeah, we really wanted to take this time and this week to talk to you guys about Jesus.
Well, at first I was thinking it'd be fun to play this episode in character as if we're just two guys watching a movie that we've never read the Bible or even heard about Jesus Christ and approaching the plot of the movie from two
Like it's
people.
just a movie, like it's just fictional.
Yeah, well,
Cause it is. No, it's not.
it's
I
just
mean,
like
it is, but it's not. So
I
for
can't.
context, we'll just get this. You and I are both, or I'm a lapsed Methodist.
I'm not a Methodist. I grew up Baptist and then non-denominational. And then as soon as I turned 18, I left the church. But
Yeah,
yeah, I have various forms of religious trauma. I thought it'd be
yeah. Me too. I
fun.
went to Bible study every week. We're from Arkansas. If you're just tuning in, so that like we came of age of into adolescence in Arkansas while George W. Bush was president. So like,
Yeah.
there's a lot going on.
I was like,
um,
we've never done a religious movie on here. Really? I mean, well, by definition, I mean, we've done The Devils, which,
yeah, but we haven't done something like this where it's straight up stories from the Gospels, passion play adaptation. Like we haven't done any of the Jesus movies, which is something we've talked about before.
yeah, I've seen a few growing up. I saw Passion of the Christ. I saw Jesus of Nazareth, which is like 4 hours. God help me.
Jesus, no pun intended.
No,
How is Passion of the Christ? Because I thought of watching it for this, but then I didn't.
I mean, I thought it was just all right.
I remember specifically. I have an early memory. I was maybe like 12, middle school age at the time. And I was in Sunday school, and there was some video, not like a movie, but some video that they were showing us that was like him on the path to the crucifixion and carrying the cross and being whipped.
Yeah,
And it was in like slow motion and like very dramatic. And the Roman officer like put his hand up to be like, stop, that's enough. I remember even then thinking like, this filmmaking is kind of pretentious,
yeah,
and
it's
that was probably
pretty
a sign of things to come.
pretty up its own ass.
Like, yeah, we kind of get it. Like, that is one of the things. I was thinking of that because I work in a movie theater, and The Chosen, which is that's a Prime Amazon Prime series, I believe, but it also comes out in theaters. Um, I was thinking like, how many times can you tell the same story? But we're also on our 11th Spider-Man movie or whatever, so I can't. Who's my Messiah? Um, and Miles Morales Messiah. I don't know. But it is an interesting thing. We were talking actually right before we hit record on this, how in those auditoriums showing that it's either nobody's in there or a whole church group is either in there, and there's almost no in between, or maybe there's one couple. But it's this thing where it's really interesting, and it is a sign of the times, and I can see how religious people would see it as a bad thing. Where this movie just, I think this is unadjusted for inflation on a $7 million budget, made about 34 million. Um, and not just because people don't go to movies anymore like they used to, unless it's Minecraft Messiah, but it's also like that used to be a bank. Like Jesus used to be much more bankable in Hollywood than he is now. Used to have your Ben Hurs and which isn't even explicitly about Jesus. And even like Spartacus, but obviously stuff like Ten Commandments, like there used to be huge movies. Those were the blockbusters. And it's interesting now that like it's become more niche, but at the same time, there's like a lot of political whiplash due to the increasing secularism of American society. I don't know. It's a weird formula and strange times that we're in.
Passion of the Christ was the highest grossing R-rated movie for years.
That is true. And again, that's when people went to the theaters. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I never saw that one. I think it was I kind of had interest in seeing it, but it's real gory. And
Oh
then
yeah, well, it's bizarre that when you're born into it, you kind of don't think about it maybe, but like the fact that this kind of imagery was so easily normalized and showed to 12-year-olds. I remember my friend was taken by his mom to see it when it came out, and we were like 9 years old. And it's like, why are you taking this 9-year-old to see this R-rated, gory fucking movie?
because you're a bad person, and look what your sin did to this Jew. It's you, fault.
You did this.
Adrian, you masturbating caused that man to bleed. He
You
had to
did.
die because you masturbated so much.
Yeah.
That's what going to youth group felt like. It's like we had to crucify this Jew because you can't stop looking at porn games on Newgrounds, Scott. That is the thing. Well, and one of the so I said this last week that I'm going to bring up this movie. One of my movies in my letterbox top four. You know, not that I have a letterbox, but if I did have one, it would be is Jesus Christ Superstar. And like one of the reasons that thing is like it I watched it when I was getting older and deconstructing my faith, and that movie less controversial than this movie, although still controversial to some, but um it gives a more secular telling of the Bible. And one of the things about that movie that I liked, similar to this movie, and this actually is like something that's debated in Christian scholarship, was the characterization of Judas. Because I, even as a kid, I never thought it made sense that Judas was portrayed as like this purely villainous figure. Because in my mind, I was like, well, if the whole point was that Jesus was the sacrificial lamb, like he had to get crucified, that was the plan. You know, it's like somebody had to do that. So
Yeah.
somebody had to be part of the plan. So saying like Judas, he's like the worst villain ever, it's like, well, like what he did led to the salvation of mankind, kind of. So like,
Yeah.
wasn't he? And I even remember watching this is something on the History Channel or something where there's an apocryphal text where, similar to in this movie, Jesus is like, somebody's going to have to turn me in, and I choose you, Judas. I may not be remembering that exactly right, but like that's even because the Bible, if you don't know, I might be, I'm going to Google it real quick to make sure I'm right, but I think it was the Council of Trent. They basically went through a bunch of religious texts and were like, what do we want in like the King James Bible? Like, what do we want? Yeah, this is held between 1545 and 1563. That is a long meeting. Holy shit. People did not have Netflix back then. Yeah, they really clarified biblical canon and all that stuff. Um, so I mean, you have things like that. I think that was in a yeah, that was in backlash to the Protestant Reformation, which is something a part of history I find very interesting personally.
Sure.
Um, and so like you do have this thing where it's like, well, there were all these religious texts, and then but man sort of like codified which ones, maybe according to what was best for the church, like were canon and which were not. Um, which I don't want to go like I'm gonna try not to go like Richard Dawkins like bashing the Bible or religious people in this, but I am approaching this from a secular point of view. Um, but I mean, and this movie is really interesting. And what did you think of this movie? Because I had not seen this before. This has been one I was meaning to
No,
watch.
I'd never seen it before. And you talking about Judas is something I noticed while watching that. While watching, it did bring up old thoughts that I had about the Bible that I'd forgotten about, including Judas, because I had thought about that a lot growing up. Like, well, he hanged himself right after. It's like, well, he deserved it, right? Well, I mean, no, not really. He was,
Oh well, if you I know I just said I'm not going to bash the Bible, but there's actually two differing conflicting accounts of Judas's death in the Gospels. One is where he hangs himself, and then the Pharisees or whomever take that money and like buy land or whatever. And then there's another one where takes that silver, buys land, and then like accidentally disembowels himself while tilling the soil. So you actually, for all those people believing in the inerrancy of the Bible, there you go.
Yeah.
Uh, just gonna leave it there.
Well, when I was younger, 19, 20, 21,
Mhm.
I was very, while deconstructing my faith, I became very averse to anything Christian. I just wanted to get out of it. It took a long time for me to want to approach any of this stuff again. And it wasn't until my mid 20s that I came to an acceptance of my religious trauma and my upbringing. And then obviously now I'm a seasoned film watcher, so yeah, I was like, well, this is Scorsese, highly controversial movie. Why is this so controversial? I had heard rumblings about Mary Magdalene, but that's about it. So I was like, well, let's turn this thing on. And we're doing an Easter movie. We've never done a movie for Easter, so I was like, what's a patrician film about Jesus that isn't Passion of the Christ, gory bullshit? And I definitely didn't want to watch Jesus of Nazareth. And it was cool to come from some filmmaker who found the teachings of Jesus and Jesus's crucifixion interesting, but also he has his own kind of story he wants to take. It's like I could almost imagine Scorsese sitting down and thinking, yes, this Jesus character is interesting, but how can we make this more interesting and better?
Well, I remember one of it's such a throwaway thing he said, but I just for a gen ed credit, I took philosophy in college, and you know, one of the throwaway things my professor said was the Bible is nothing if not minimalist literature, which is like you don't really think about it, but it's like yeah, you're covering like 6,000 years of history in one book. Like it has to be quick. So like it's not a psychological novel. And like the idea of a cycle, I mean, first of all, it's not a novel, but it's like second of all, the idea of like a psychological novel, that's like a 20th century conception, of not that Shakespeare didn't have a psychology to his characters or whatever, but like I think like the purpose of this text, it's not to be like a novel or entertaining, but also like it just doesn't have time to get that deep into the characters, if you will. It has to be like, all right, and then there's this stuff with Noah, and then we're moving ahead, and then there's Abraham. Like it just has to like keep going at a quick clip, and but except also take time off to like name genealogies for like
Yeah,
20
now
minutes.
we're gonna name how Abraham led to Jesus.
Yeah.
But, but yeah, it's like goddamn Scorsese had me cracking open the Bible the first time in 10 years. And I was like, I spent like 45 minutes skimming through Matthew and I read a good chunk of it, but it's like there's the core of the story is right there, and it's like 45 minutes an hour, you can get it, and and it's been so picked apart for 1,000 years. It's like, sheesh.
It is crazy. I don't remember if I said it but earlier, but it's like how many times can you hear the same story? And how do you retell this story in an interesting way? And honestly, it's part of the like God, the problem with religious art is like it has to be conservative. And I'm not even talking politically conservative, but it's like you kind of have to resist a certain degree of interpretation. Now, but you are able to have people, if they're based, like Scorsese, he's a Catholic. He's a religious guy. Those themes bleed out into his works. Even as gangster movies, they're morality tales at the end
Yeah.
of the day. Like his Catholicism, I would definitely argue, I think most people would like at least subtly, or if not subtly greater than that, like influences those works. Did you ever see Silence?
Yes.
Yeah, and so I did not, and I didn't have time to watch it before this, but I also didn't have time to read the entire Bible again. But it is a thing like he's clearly struggled with, and I don't know if I'd call him a Christian apologist, but I mean, he's definitely a guy who doesn't take things at face value and like truly meditates, and I'm sure has prayed and like struggled with these sort of things, and like what I always think of like the seventh seal when Max von Sydow is like, what does God do with us who like want to believe in him but can't? Why does he not show himself to me? All that stuff, which I think anybody who's being honest, like like you have to have doubts at sometimes, which is an interesting thing because like, and it's portrayed well in this movie, the agony in the garden of Gethsemane, which is also a banger musical number in Jesus Christ Superstar. um Ted Neely, who's portrayed Jesus, like I saw him like 10 years ago at my college. They were doing a production of Jesus Christ Superstar at the college, like they were on tour, and it's still Ted Neely, the same guy who did the movie from the
That's
70s.
cool.
Yeah, and he was old. I was up close enough where I could be like, even with the stage makeup, that guy's old. Like that guy's not in his 30s like Jesus. But um pipes aren't what they used to be. He still has some pipes, better than you and I. But it's interesting because I know that guy's religious, and that movie again, but it definitely has Jesus asking like, why do I have to die? Is there another way? And that is in the gospel, I believe. He says, I'm reading it, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass me by. Nevertheless, let it be as you, not I, would have it. So like, I don't think that's doubt in the way of like the way that Jesus is doubting that he exists, but like I find that very that makes me connect more to the idea of Christ. And some people I think almost resist the idea of Jesus also being human. And that is one of the inherent contradictions. Like I remember talking to a Muslim guy once, and he was like, it was very interesting. He was like, how can God have a son? And I was like, he created the universe. Like, why is that the line where it's like, well, how could he do that? But also I understand like the inherent contradiction because Jesus is a holy figure in Islam. I think a lot of people may not realize that. Like Mary, and I think Mary was a virgin. I'm sure people in the comments will correct me if I'm wrong, but like they're still revered figures, in Islam. You know,
That's what I liked is that, like I was saying, I imagine Scorsese sit in a room and be like, "Well, I think Jesus is a little too dimensional. Let's amp it
he
up a little
is.
bit." Yeah,
He's no, he doesn't have much of an arc because that's not what it's for
I
in
know,
the Bible.
but it's good that he wanted to expand on because, like, really, that's the main part of the Bible that people talk about not that Jesus has regret, but that he wonders if there might be any other way or something. And it's like, oh, let's take that, expand on it, and make him really having trouble here. And because he's talking about how fear at the beginning is all he has, and that his God is fear at the moment. Like, that's pretty heavy. And
It's
he,
very heavy. Well, it's again another religious movie I really like. Not probably a bit more uneven than this, but arguably more entertaining. Kevin Smith's Dogma, which is actually another movie that like it would come on Comedy Central when I was like, I don't know, 14 or something, and it was like pretty influential to me. And
a
made me
movie
think,
that inexplicably has more exposition than the Bible.
yeah, it's all exposition. But I mean, there's a whole point. It's kind of the midpoint of the movie where what's her name? Bethany? Is that the
Yeah.
main character? She's like struggling with like, why, like, God, why are you putting me through this? It's a parallel thing. And then, Alan Rickman as the Metatron, as the angel, comes down to him and he's like, I had to go to a 13-year-old boy, a child who wanted nothing else than to play with other children and tell him that like he was going to be tortured to death. And he's like, and that's not fair, and I would take it back if I could. But that is something that like, again, like if we're going with the idea of Jesus as a man, like, and just even if we're taking the Bible at face value, like you tell that to a 13-year-old boy, like that is a massive weight. And you can't just act like somebody would be unaffected by that if you're going to also say they're a man. that they're 100% man and 100% God. Like you just can't say, just because Jesus was without sin that he was without struggle. Even before the cross. Which I
Yeah.
think when you phrase it that way, I think most Christians would. I don't think he was clearly struggling and had a righteous fury when he was, tipping over tables of the moneylenders in the Bible, and as he does in this movie. You know,
Even when I watched Dogma, I was still somewhat religious, and
me too.
I was impressed that, like, yeah, it was raunchy, but it wasn't offensive to me at the time. I didn't think it was something that should be like condemned, and I was fascinated by the pushback of that movie. Um,
Pushback of people who hadn't seen the movie yet before it
yeah, and
came
that's
out.
that comes back in this movie. I was wondering, like, is your faith really that shaky that you can't watch this kind of play on Jesus and think that if people watch it, they'll get the wrong idea? Or like, I don't really, and I was just
Yes.
waiting. Yeah, but it's like, I mean, he goes to observe Mary Magdalene in the act when she's a prostitute, and he has probably some feelings, but at first, I mean, it's played pretty safe, I'd say. I mean, it's got nudity and stuff, but I wouldn't say it's outright outrageous.
Yeah, but what would your mother think of this movie,
I
Adrian?
I should probably condemn it. I don't know.
Because I was listening to an interview with Paul Schrader, the screenwriter, also the screenwriter for Taxi Driver.
Which we don't have to discuss him and what's going on. So,
Oh, what did he do this time? He's
well,
like,
he
isn't he like low key pro AI now?
it's a little worse than generative AI. I'll let
What's
you
he
look it
doing?
up.
What's he doing? Now, no, I'm talking about it now. What did he do this time?
Well, he's got some allegations that just came out.
Oh, no. Oh, this is one day ago.
Yeah.
Oh, he kissed a former assistant? Ooh, is there more than that? Well,
And it's
okay.
hard not to talk about his allegations without discussing his work and Taxi Driver and how you can kind of fall into the things that you're might be criticizing or pointing commentary at. I don't know, it's strange.
Of like what sexual immorality and like
Yeah,
societal
and just
decay.
like, I mean, that movie's got a 12-year-old prostitute in it, and it's
Exactly.
just a lot of themes. And we talked about that with Chinatown, but
Yeah, well that's even more egregious.
that's insane.
I'm sure I've not read the Schrader allegations. I don't think, I mean, even if he's a piece of shit, I don't think he's the mountain of shit that Roman Polanski is.
No,
But that's
no, I'm not saying that, but
it doesn't matter. It's
it is
like
interesting
piece of
because
shit's
this
piece of
is
shit.
like not his first collaboration with Scorsese, so it's I don't know, it's cool that he's Schrader's pretty versatile with his scripts. Just, I mean, Scorsese, people always think of gangster picks, but watch this, watch Hugo, he's got it. Uh,
Watch King of Comedy, then watch our episode on King
oh
of
yeah,
Comedy.
we've done King of Comedy and we've done Goodfellas. I don't think any other Scorsese's though.
No, I think that's it off the top of my head.
Yeah, but I
And
thought
I
it
mean,
was
and this really, oh, because I'm gonna try to pronounce his name. It's very Greek. The novelist of the book, because this is based on a novel, of course, Nikos Kazantzakis, I think. Um, Nikos Taziki. That's terrible. That's racist.
Jesus.
They're technically white, I guess. I don't know. He also wrote Zorba the Greek. That's interesting. I didn't know that. I didn't realize that was the same guy. He also translated the Divine Comedy, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and On the Origin of Species, and the Iliad and Odyssey into modern Greek. Wow, that guy got around. Holy
Yeah.
crap. Um, no, I didn't realize he was that prolific. Nominated for the Nobel Prize in Literature in 9 different years, remains the most translated Greek author worldwide. Wow, I didn't know he was that big. But like, he caught so much shit when this came out. I mean, because the book was published
In the
in,
50s.
yeah, dude, in the 50s.
Imagine.
God, I really can't. Like, I literally can't. Especially like you're in Greece, which is a like culturally conservative, like coming out of the World War II, and like obviously big religious presence with your Orthodox Church. And also I think the idea of like being very cultured. We are the cradle of Western civilization sort of idea. Yeah, the balls on that guy. Like there's no other way to say it. Like massive cojones on that guy to do that. But also like clearly he was, because there's a Star Wars crawl at the beginning of this film where it's a quote from him, the author, Nikos. I'm just gonna say Nikos, my cousin. Um, Talking about like how he is conflicted and like fascinated in the difference between like the spirit and the flesh, and like how are those are both embodied in Christ. Because as much as Christ embodies like the human and the divine, in a way, so do we. Because if you take the idea that like we're made in God's image and that we have a spiritual self and a physical self, and just Christ is just like that cranked up to 11. In a way, he's like the most human because of that. You
Yeah.
know, um, but I think my point is like I think it's more interesting and like makes me connect more to the idea of Jesus, seeing him portrayed like he is here, or even in Jesus Christ Superstar, where he is more human and he is struggling, you know.
Also, when you're forming a narrative for a film, you need a setup, his connection to Mary. So when they're stoning her, he feels the urge more than ever to stop it. And then obviously the connection to the last 30 minutes of the film. So it's like,
Which, by the way, make the movie.
yeah, because
It's
up until
because
then, it's kind of just like Jesus' greatest hits.
yeah, that's how. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. I'm like, okay, this is an interesting sort of more nuanced than normal retelling of like the Passion, and the greatest hits. Um, but I'm not really super into it, for because I do think if I have a criticism of this movie, like a lot of people do, I do think it could be trimmed down. I don't know where I would have to see it again. It is long, but um yeah, once we get to the actual Last Temptation, I was all in. I was like, okay, this is amazing. Like this
Yeah,
is
that was cool.
really good.
But I do like how I like the setup of Jesus being someone who crafts like part of the cross and helps people become crucified. That's part of his job. And the way Scorsese portrays him having these intrusive thoughts, not just about Mary, but just in general about not wanting to be the Messiah, etc. And I like when he goes to the desert and he becomes purified and he sees he has the trials and everything. I think it's done in a I like the execution aesthetically. I like the whole aspect that he said going forward that he didn't want aesthetically for it to be extravagant or grand in scope. He wanted it to be more grounded and smaller scale, which fits obviously with the budget. But I thought it was refreshing because when I see the Bible portrayed in media, it's usually very lavish, very big, and
Yeah, it's your Cecil B. DeMille sort of
yeah,
big grand 8,000 extras.
yeah,
And this is more what it was probably like, because I mean, this is like Iron Age man or whatever.
yeah. But it's like when you read the Bible and when you see it in media, the crucifixion is almost like this grand scale event. In
Dude,
reality,
he
it
was he
was,
was another political prisoner.
yeah,
There's a line we got to watch Jesus Christ Superstar or something, man. Here's the thing, I'm not gonna sit here and tell you it's the best movie or best musical ever made. It's not. But there's some stuff I really like, and there's one point. We'll get to Pilot in this movie.
oh yeah.
And that I was like, whoa, hey, I was pointing at the
I
screen
was
like,
taken aback. Yeah,
yeah, I was like, what the but in Jesus Christ Superstar, and this is scripturally accurate. Like I remember talking about this in Sunday school. Like Pilate catches flack. Pilate was doing his job, and which is an excuse that many people have used throughout history to soldiers to like carry out atrocities. But at the same time, like he's like, I wash my hands of it because he's like, I don't want to do this. This guy is, he's like, yeah, this guy's like running around saying things, but like, do you have to kill him? And I remember there's at one point, the crowd is turned against Jesus because the entire conceit of Jesus Christ Superstar is like, it's treating Jesus through the lens of like he's the first rock star. And that's why it's a rock opera. It's not a musical technically, it's a rock opera. There's no talking. And he's like, all these people are like, crucify him. They've turned on him. The crowd is like chanting at him. And he's one of the things he's like, you Jews go through messiahs by the sackful. And so, like, Jesus, like John the Baptist, was one of many holy men in this time who were against this. And one of the things, again, and what's actually, I think, my favorite song in it is the opening number with Judas, who, like, the Messiah is not just a spiritual figure; he is a political figure, And I'm not Jewish, so if you're a Jew, leave a comment and correct me. But like the whole idea at the time is like he was going to free us from the Romans and like be like a military figure almost, like be like a warrior king, And that's why the character of Jesus like is so interesting because he's a subversion of that. And he talks about love in this. And I think one thing that a lot of people lose and that Martin Luther King actually understood is like love is not this like passive emotion. Love is this like active thing that you have to do. It is a transformative, active, powerful thing that you have to do, like a current to wash away evil. You can't just like passively love things. And I think that was a subversion. But at the same time, like in Jesus Christ Superstar, for instance, and to a lesser degree in this movie, Judas is like, we're occupied and you're like pissing all the Romans off and calling attention to us. And like, you're actually like bringing heat on the Jews and potentially making our situation worse by doing all this. That's how it's characterized in that movie, which I just think is, and it's not exactly that in this, but there's certainly elements of it.
Well, it's kind of, I found it kind of humorous how quickly Judas comes to kill him, and then he's like, actually, you know what? I'm gonna follow you instead. Fuck it.
Yeah, and remind me, I kind of forget who is telling Judas to kill Jesus. Is
I
he like
don't,
being paid by the Romans or something?
yeah, something like that. I don't really
It is
remember.
very quick, but also I think that's another thing of like Judas is like, I don't really want to kill this guy. Also, I'm a Jew. This guy's a Jew. I don't
I
want to
think
kill
there's
my own
a
people.
couple of issues. For instance, Judas is Harvey Keitel, and no one told him to get rid of his New York accent, and he just says "fuck it," and
That
it
is
was
something I
it
noticed.
was unintentionally funny at times.
Yeah,
And
I just kind of overlooked it. Willem
well,
Dafoe is a more neutral
you already
accent.
have white Jesus anyway,
Yeah,
so
you already have White Jesus, which is like I don't even know if we have to say anything about it. It's a movie from 1980.
yeah.
Like it wouldn't have been made otherwise. Is that messed up? Yes. Is it messed up that like then all the secondary characters and even like less savory characters are more native brown skinned? Is that problematic? Yes, but the movie wouldn't exist otherwise. And yeah, old Hollywood was racist. What else is new? Like it's not news to anybody at this point, I think.
I remember
It does take me out of movies
my
now.
grandma
What?
was putting up the nativity scene for Christmas, and I picked up baby Jesus. I was like, wow, this guy's really pale, and she like had a fit.
She got mad. Dude, that's a weird thing. That's another thing I never understood is like some people like actually do resist the idea that Jesus was brown, which tells you all about like
Yeah.
Christian nationalism in this country that has metastasized into our current situation, you know,
Yeah.
because American Christianity is a rejection of European institutions, but also that's sort of a rejection of scholarship as well, because those same religious institutions were the beginning of a lot of scholarship and critical thought. A lot of the religious revivals in the United States were, more grassroots. And even though they were less centralized because of that, there was also less scholarship involved. There's been stuff written on this. Richard Hofstadter, 1964, Anti-Intellectualism in American Life. Great book if you're looking for a not a light, but a good read.
I do like.
Shout out to my Mufasa cup, by the way. I just want to say my because they did not sell enough at the theater, so I got one. So that movie bombed. Also a Christ figure, Mufasa. Anyway,
Yeah, you think this Jesus guy is kind of a Christ figure, but but I was thinking that the whole time, like, but I like how the disciples are. It's kind of when you're taught in Sunday school, it kind of sounds like the disciples are just, oh, this guy's obviously Jesus. We have to follow him. And that's not even rereading it. It's like that's not the case. They're like many times they're like, oh, well, yeah, maybe he is the Messiah. Oh, he is. He must be the Messiah. He's doing this. And I like that that movie is like in this movie, it's very much like they're following him because they think he's a great prophet, but it takes a minute for them to be like, yeah, I think this guy is the Messiah. And then he pulls his heart out and they're like, well, this guy is the real deal.
yeah, they played the miracles, and I think that's is that before the water into wine? I think that
Yeah,
is.
yeah, it is.
Yeah, so that's the first thing we see, and you're like, is he pulling his own heart out, or is this like sleight of hand? And then, and then
Probably
the water
both.
into wine thing, we don't actually see him change it. He's like, check again. It literally reminds me of the Family Guy joke where they're like, Jesus, we're out of wine. He just yells off screen, check again, thank you.
Yeah.
Um, but and then once he resurrects Lazarus, we're in full on miracle mode.
We're full, but I love how against himself he is in that first third of the movie. Like he is struggling hardcore. And
No,
then
he's given speeches like it's his first open mic, and he's trying to like build an act. He's like,
yeah, no, it's watching him in the moment, seeing him find his footing while telling a parable. Like he's not even sure how to even start. And that's just one of many ways that Scorsese humanizes Jesus, which of course, like you said, makes me connect to him even more. Seeing him find his footing and then jump into the teachings is a really good way to grow his character.
do you think do you think Jesus could read?
Yeah.
You think he could?
Yeah, he just he has the knowledge of God.
Is he omniscient?
Maybe to a degree, I don't know.
I don't know. I just googled.
We're gonna power scale Jesus here.
I'm hearing conflict. I'm reading conflicting things here. Well, I'm just saying, and I'm not saying that in an insulting way. Power scale, Jesus, Jesus. Um, but you know, back then you're a carpenter. Which, by the way, also remember from a random History Channel documentary I watched as a kid that like the Greek word that they get for carpenter is actually like tektov, which just kind of means any manual labor. So he wasn't even necessarily a carpenter, but because he uses metaphors, like he talks about trees a lot, and he talks about like getting the plank out of your own eye before you get the speck out of your brother's eye, like stuff like that. That are like carpenter seems like the most likely sort of thing. Not that it really matters what his day job was.
Yeah,
Um,
he's a handyman, whatever.
yeah, dude, he's just the guy at the apartment complex you call.
Here's a cigarette. Thanks for fixing my sink real quick.
Yeah.
Um, the the water into wine is where it really kind of almost shifts tones for a minute with the way he's just fully in it and he's kind of like winking at them like, yeah, that's right, bitch. I got the powers. For a second, you're like, okay, because it's kind of a quick shift. I know they've got a lot of ground to cover and there's a lot of stuff technically that they left out, but it doesn't matter. It's not focused. It's focused centrally on Jesus instead of the mainly the disciples' perspective, which I can find interesting uh, within the Bible, especially.
Right. And some of the, I mean, a lot of the disciples, like whoever talks about Bartholomew, what did he do? You know, like some of the disciples are you're just like, who's that guy? You know, it's kind of like the Ringo Starr of the disciples sort of thing, you know, the less
Yeah.
impressive. What do you think of the casting of Willem Dafoe? You already said Harvey Keitel's accent is not great. What do you think of Willem Dafoe in this movie?
Well, I'm always a huge fan of Willem Dafoe, and I think he does a good job for the part that he's given. I'm not gonna say he's a perfect idea of Jesus, but he gets the job done.
He is perfect or as perfect as can be for this movie,
Yeah.
which is all you can ask of an actor, of course.
Yeah.
It's like you couldn't transplant him to, like, if you transplanted him to Passion of the Christ, it'd be weird. It wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Um, but it's like you need a little bit of craziness because you have to, like, and at the beginning of the movie when he's like writhing on the floor basically in a straw, straw floor in this like mud hut, it's you got to understand like a lot of these religious people were hearing voices. um I mean, there's even the idea that the oracle at Delphi in Greece, ancient Greece, was in a cave, but there were volcanic gases giving them hallucination. Like there's all sorts of that stuff. Medicine
Yeah.
men, like, tribal societies, you know, sometimes it's like, were these people just schizophrenic and then people didn't know enough about science to like question their visions? Like who knows?
I like the detail because I was worried like when he does get a bit cheeky about turning water into wine, when they reel it back in when he goes to Lazarus, and he himself is kind of unsure maybe what he might be capable of. And when he realizes that he has brought back Lazarus back to life, I like the detail in this scene that Jesus himself seems overwhelmed by the power at this point. The way he says, God help me, kind of shows like that level of power must be scary. And I like that portrayal of like, whoa,
Right, because again, imagine if you, again, it makes it more relatable, which frankly the Bible kind of doesn't do, because I think it's useful to religious authorities to make us feel distant from Jesus and God in a way, so that we're more reliant on them as a path to God. Which is, especially in like the Catholic Church, where you have to like confess to a priest, versus most Protestant churches where like it emphasizes a more personal relationship with God, you know.
also I
Um,
couldn't help but think in a different movie, it'd be really funny if he goes to pull the arm of Lazarus and it just rips straight off and he's like holding the arm like, oh shit.
it's a gnarly looking arm, but it's
Yeah.
good. It looks like how it should. He's been hanging out there for 3 days, and he's still. It is funny. He's like, Jesus, you can resurrect me, but you can't exfoliate me. What's going on? Uh,
Um,
and then Fredo kills him later, right?
no, it's goddamn Harry Dean Stanton.
Oh, it's Harry Dean Stanton, not Fredo. Yeah, it is Harry Dean Stanton.
Yeah, fucking yeah, he plays Saul. I was like, he showed at first he just showed up in that one scene. I was like, are we not gonna get more of him? And then he goes and kills Lazarus. And I'm like, damn, imagine being brought back to life in a one of a kind miracle and then just getting stabbed a day later.
You're getting spawn killed, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, you know who else is in this movie as Zebedee, as a kind of minor role? Irvin Kershner.
Oh yeah, weird.
Yeah, I didn't even know Irvin Kershner acted. I just know him as the guy who directed Empire Strikes Back. So,
Also
like
interesting
everything with
that
us, it all goes back to
Scorsese put
Star Wars.
himself.
And you know who my favorite Christ figure is? Anakin Skywalker.
I think it's interesting that Scorsese had to put himself in the movie. So
Where did he put him in the movie?
he's a disciple.
He is?
Yeah,
How did I not notice this?
he looks a bit different back then.
Yeah. Are you sure?
I thought.
I'm not seeing it on the cast list.
Okay, I thought he was in one of the scenes.
He might have been an extra or something. I don't think he was a disciple. I'm not. I'm looking at all the apostles. Yeah, it's not. I don't think it is. I could be wrong.
Okay,
Doesn't
but
matter.
yeah, I was like, also Parker, my fiance loves Willem Dafoe, and it was like the most unintentionally, like you would think it was a pointed joke, but it wasn't. But when he was whipped and getting the thorns put on his head, she said, "Jesus Christ, dude!" And then it took her a split second to realize she's like, "Oh, exactly." And it made me
Was
think of
she?
the Big Lebowski. You said it,
Yeah,
man.
you said it, man. Was she raised religious?
Yeah,
Okay.
he went to Christian private
Oh
school,
yeah, I knew that.
Episcopal.
Well, some people send them to those schools just for a supposedly better education, but it's a weird thing where, like, for instance, I've dated women who weren't raised religious, and like trying to explain the Bible to people who like didn't grow up with it, and like the idea of the second coming and having to torture this man to death to like save our sin. It's a weird story. People say it's the greatest story ever told, but like, dude, Christianity has so much suffering and guilt, even when compared to other world religions. Like it's really messed up. It's
That's
dark.
our me and Parker's biggest divide is that she was never taught about the rapture or anything surrounding the rapture. That was not in their gospel.
Which
So
is well, it's also one of those things like the rapture. There's some like it's. I don't think we know 100% what the rapture is or how it's going. A lot of Christian eschatology is speculation based on like other biblical prophecy and a few lines of the Bible, you know. But I don't know how much scriptural basis there is for like certain concepts like that.
yeah, well, I
Like
just
the idea of hell being a land of fire and brimstone, like that's a medieval, you know.
simpleton shit.
I mean, yeah, that's like medieval stained glass window stuff. I mean, there's a lake of fire and sulfur in Revelation, not Revelations, Revelation.
Yeah,
But
I keep calling it Aldi's, but it's just called Aldi. That's what it
yeah,
makes me think
well, at
of.
least you're not saying Kroger's. That one ticks me off.
Kroger's piss
I don't know
for
why.
no good reason. I'm just annoying about certain shit.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just me being
When
annoyed.
I explained, like, I broke down Rapture and like Book of Revelation stuff, her jaw like drops. Just like, and because I kind of had to explain why I had so much rapture anxiety as like a 8-year-old boy. Like it was debilitating to a point where I couldn't wrap my head around it. And like the concept of the rapture terrified me, and the concept of eternity can't uh terrified me. And there was a time when I was 8 years old that I began to, I didn't know it at the time, but really start to pick apart and deconstruct a lot of the stuff that didn't make sense to me. And I was like, some of this doesn't add up, even at 8 years old. But it's like I had an actual existential freak out. I like stayed inside for like several months and didn't want to play or go outside or do anything because I was like terrified of religious shit. And I feel resentment towards a lot of the faith because of that. And I realized, and it's like I was watching this film from a film buff point of view, obviously, but even when watching him get crucified in the film, it brought up old bubbling feelings of anger and resentment towards just the imagery itself. It's very powerful, but very just it.
Made it's the most my I always joke that like the best thing that Catholicism gave us is all of the imagery for heavy metal album covers. Um, and yeah, no, it's imagery. I mean, crucifixion was a real thing, but like
Yes,
it's
but just the
imagery designed
manipulation
to like
behind
mess
that
with you and make you feel
historically,
guilty.
it just brought up a lot of angry feelings that I hadn't felt in a while because really I had come to terms with a lot of this deconstruction along a while ago. And it was interesting that Scorsese was able to direct the scene in a way that did that. And I was kind of at that point starting to emotionally disconnect from it. And I didn't know if that was because of religious trauma or what. But it was right after that that the movie was like, oh, wait, we're not done here. Let's turn it up a notch.
Yeah, here's the last temptation. Okay. I just because this popped in my head, I heard something about like, Jesus kisses a man in this movie. And it's like he kisses John the Baptist, who is portrayed as like kind of crazy, which I like. And like there's the Judas kiss, which is a thing that happened
It's
in the Bible.
biblical. Yeah. What's the big deal?
Yeah, but it's not sexual. Like neither of those were sexual. It's not like, Jesus is like, I don't know, going to a glory hole or something. Like the way
Yeah.
people talk about it, that was incredibly crude the way I just said that.
Other than the first bit where he's doubting himself and talking about fear as his own God, and then the stuff with Mary Magdalene, after you get past that, most of the movie is a pretty faithful retelling. So I was like, well, what is so crazy?
Did did he I know with the moneylenders and stuff, he like did all that, he flipped the tables and everything. But did he 3 days later bring people to like storm that temple? Did that happen, or is that
I was actually unclear about that sequence.
I don't remember that being in the scripture. It may have been, but I don't remember. Also, all four of the gospels are different. They tell different stories,
Yeah.
like different, which is another thing that makes it
I
complicated.
know. Well, I think he said he intended for that temple to be brought down, like he said. So I don't
But
know.
but it's the thing is, so the whole point with, so that is the, if I'm doing this correctly, I think that is the second temple. That is a rebuilt Solomon's temple, and then like part of the messy, and it was, as we see in, later in the film, like that temple was destroyed by the Romans during a time of strife, and like a third version of that temple, a rebuilding of that temple, is one of the things that will lead to the Messianic age and the end of the world. Which is, and that's how, I mean, we get into a whole mess of, we're not even going to talk about all the political strife happening nowadays due to interpretations of that in the Middle East and in Israel nowadays. But it is, so I mean, I think he wanted to cleanse it. I don't know if he wanted to destroy it. I don't know, but that's another thing where like he's supposed to, at least traditionally, supposed to be like this kind of warrior, figure, but like he's not. Ultimately, he's about love. He can't be what the people want, but he can be what they need. He's not he's not the hero they deserve, but he's the hero they
Yeah.
need.
Going back. Yeah. It all goes back. Spider-Man 2. I
What?
believe there's a hero in all of us, just like how we all have to accept Jesus into our hearts.
Right. Christ is in all of us, as is Spider-Man. So we get to the end of this movie, which makes the movie. It was okay. I was like kind of into it. I was just tired when I watched it. I've been not sleeping well recently, and I was like, okay, this is like okay. I'm not like bored completely. Oh, we skipped over. Hold on, we skipped over David Bowie's
Oh
Pontius
yeah,
Pilate.
that was cool.
We can't. Yeah, that came out of nowhere. It didn't
Very
take me out
80s.
of the movie, but he does a good
He
job.
does a great job. I kind of wish there was more scenes like that with just their simple back and forth, but talking about kind of why it things have to happen and it's kind of off of his hands, you know.
Dude,
It's
I seriously, I like Jesus Christ Superstar delves more into that because it's
yeah.
like ultimately the Pharisees are the one who wanted him out because they were a threat to the order, and they were like, we have no law to put a man to death, so they had to get the Romans to do it. And then Pontius, he sends Jesus to Herod, and this is all also in the Bible, of course.
Yeah.
Because Herod's the local ruler,
Prick. Yeah.
he's I don't think he was part of the Romans, but he was, like essentially like their puppet. But and uh Herod, who's almost like kind of an effeminate king in the, imagine like 70s glam rockers are like around him in the movie.
Okay.
Um and like glitter on their faces and stuff. And and in the Bible too, he's like almost like in a kind of unaffected, disaffected manner, is like, well, why don't you do some like tricks for me? I've heard about you, and kind of gets disappointed when Jesus isn't like entertaining him with magic tricks. And he's like, yeah, they can crucify you if you want, like almost disinterestedly, and like gets irritated with them. But the whole thing is like, yeah, it was a political killer, And again, Pontius was like, this is just what it has to be. This is my job. Because there's another thing, there's several, because it's a stage production, several interpretations of Jesus Christ Superstar. And I like the movie version, and I like Bowie here, who's almost a more regal, sort of aristocratic Roman officer versus some interpretations I've seen where he's like a hard nosed kind of like military
Kind of
figure,
a brute.
kind of a brute. Like, I don't like that interpretation of Pontius Pilate. I think like he was probably a politically savvy guy who was able to climb ranks in the Roman army and become captain of that whatever region or whatever. So, and I think Bowie captures that aspect and that interpretation of Pilate very well.
Totally.
Okay.
It just adds to that kind of, there's a slight 80s flair to this movie. And the fucking
There's
Peter Gabriel does the score, and you can kind of hear some of the sounds are very Peter Gabriel, like
Now that
kind
you're
of
saying that, I didn't realize that, but now that you're saying that, yeah, I can absolutely hear that just thinking about it. I can't
yeah.
even think of a particular melody, but just thinking about watching the movie yesterday and thinking about, I'm like, yeah, there's some Peter Gabriel stuff in that. You know, I wanna be your sledgehammer. Um,
Yeah.
Sledgehammer referring to what was used to nail Jesus to the cross. Okay.
Got him.
Um, but it was anyway. So we're getting to the Last Temptation part of the Last Temptation,
Yeah.
which is where I mean the movie it doesn't ratchet up a notch. It ratchets up like 4 notches in quality for me, or just in terms of interest. Because this is something I've never seen before. The rest of the movie is a different interpretation.
Bible fan fiction,
It is. It's Bible fan fiction. It's like the Book
but
of Mormon.
it like makes it so much more interesting. And it makes sense within it, like totally could, I don't know. It's within reason that there would be one last test or even on the cross that the devil would tempt him. That just totally makes sense within the narrative of the story, I think.
100%. Did you understand pretty quickly that that girl was the devil, or that that girl was not an
I was
angel?
unsure of what she was for a lot of it, and then in the towards the second half of that sequence, because it's like a 30-minute sequence,
Yeah,
and towards the second half, I started to be like, I don't know what she is, but I like my mind, like I almost sat up when he's brought off the cross and he's like, am I the Messiah? And she says no. I like I like sat up. I was like, oh, okay, here we go.
yeah. Well, that's I'm like, this is what people were upset about, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Because
I
then
was
it starts giving
waiting.
you this questions like, well, in this movie, is this just an alternate universe where the crucifixion just didn't happen? Um, then you can get into this argument of like, she's like, well, um, God didn't really want Abraham to kill Isaac. He saved Isaac. Why would he not save his own son? You know, which is a compelling argument, but then you can be the like, and this is the problem of suffering essentially, of like, well, why doesn't he save other people? Why doesn't he save those 2 thieves on either side? Although,
Yeah.
or is that because they're actual criminals? But which, by the way, it was rough times. I know material conditions weren't that great back then, but the idea that you could be a thief and put to death for that is pretty intense. Thieves don't get put to death in modern society. Rapists don't get put to death in modern society,
Yeah.
really. Um, yeah, it has to be murder, pretty much. Um, and no, when she brings him down, I was like kind of suspicious though. And but it is a thing where like I don't know how much did the real Jesus like. I mean, one of my more controversial beliefs, I guess, is like I think Jesus was probably in a relationship with Mary Magdalene. I mean, in real life, I mean, um, even though I guess Jesus lived and died as a virgin, because he was never married.
Ultimate Sigma male
Yeah,
story.
exactly. It's hard not to make like weird, like he was a Volcel, kind of jokes, but um, I don't know if I were walking around with a prostitute all the time and like I'm just like, no, she's just my friend. People would raise eyebrows.
Yeah.
Um, just saying, but which is fine. Be human because you are.
Yeah, that's like, is he a human or is he not?
And
Like,
then one of the are you if you're denying him so many things, is he fully human? And if humans are naturally flawed by making them perfect, is he really human? Because then also are you saying that people can be perfect? But then part of the idea is that we're all born with original sin, with the exception of Jesus and Mary. By the way, just pedantic thing. The Immaculate Conception is not about Jesus. It's about Mary being born without original sin. That's a common misconception. Um, but it's like, well, are you saying that we can reach this sort of humanity? But like by giving him those doubts, again, we keep coming back to it, it makes him more human. But by not allowing him these sort of things, by not allowing him to have a wife because of his godly duty, like, are you stripping a part of his humanity from him? You know?
sure. And then at the end of the day, they're in this fantasy, they're married, and then they consummate the marriage, which is very holy and very pro God. So
Yes, because they're and although also very ballsy of Scorsese to film that and put it on
hell
screen and
yeah.
then have people come. But like, I don't know, what are you going to be? They're like, hey, they're married. It's all good. It's all good under God. Like, what are you? He's having children.
Jesus,
You do
yeah,
get, speaking of incel
is
things,
it that wrong of him to want a traditional life, a family? Like he knows what he has to do, but is that a sin? Is that breaking his perfectness to just have those desires of having a wife and child?
right? Is where in the Bible does it say it's a sin to lament what could have been? You know,
Yeah.
or to say this is my duty, but I wish it weren't, and to carry it out anyway. Then we get into some really intense discussions.
Yeah.
But the one of the things, first of all, it's interesting. The only like British accent you hear in this movie is the little girl who's supposedly a guardian angel. The use of British accents in American productions is always interesting to
Yeah.
me. Like, it's like, what are they trying to connote? Is it like Star Wars where they're the villains, or are they trying to be regal? Like
Yeah, it's
every
more of like
movie.
a classical Renaissance regality.
Yeah, that's what I get. It's a sort of like the whole joke is like everybody in the olden time in like Gladiator, you have Commodus, talking in a British accent for some
Yeah.
reason, even though they should not be talking like this. Yeah, that's all I can
Yeah.
think of. Like, I just like, what if Denzel in Gladiator 2 is like, hey, Commodus is dead. I
No,
don't
it'd been better if he was like, "What's up, playa?" No, but
It's offensive.
yeah, well,
And I want you to apologize
I'm
because you
gonna
don't say
write
anything offensive
I'm
on
gonna
here.
write a note in my notes app and then post it on Twitter later. Don't worry.
Okay, yeah. That is so weird. It's like you want us to think that you're. How did that aesthetic? I know this is off topic. How did that aesthetic start? Like,
They wanted to, for some reason, they want you to feel like it was off the cuff and just the first thing that came to your head and not pre-planned. So
yeah,
it's either
not written by somebody else.
they either write it in their notes app and post it on Twitter, or they get a 4K nice camera, put it on the ground in their living room, and then they sit in front of their couch as like a way to be like, I'm just doing this spur
Oh,
of
and
the
they
moment.
do the thing where you can see them turn on and off the camera by putting they're like, they do that to be like, I'm just turning this, I'm not editing
Yeah.
this off. I'm a real person. See how I'm like touching the camera? This isn't
Yeah.
somebody else isn't filming me, I'm filming myself.
Yeah.
They do that. What do you think? Reminds me of there's a line in Jesus Christ Superstar where he says it what basically Judas is like, why'd you come 2,000 years ago? If you had come today, you would have reached a whole nation. Israel in 4 BC had known mass communication. Um, but also, like, I don't know, he couldn't reach everybody, but everybody would just thought of him as another crackpot conspiracy theorist on TikTok if Jesus came today. So I don't know.
Which leads into the most interesting part of the movie to me is when Jesus has a family now, something he always wanted, and he hears tales being told about him by Saul. I guess he's probably Paul at this point.
Yeah, he is
Te-
Paul at this point.
And he's like, "Why would you say this? This didn't happen to me." And Paul says, "It doesn't matter if you're Christ or not. The resurrected Christ is what matters. It's what the people need. I created the truth because it's what the people need." And I was like, "Okay, this movie rules."
There's a really good book by Michael Moorcock, who's normally known for his like heroic fantasy novels. To the point of the entire idea of like in D&D of like chaotic evil, neutral good, all that the alignment that comes from Michael Moorcock. He's a very
Yeah.
like important fantasy writer. But the only book of his I've read is because the only one I could find was Behold the Man, which is actually it's about. I'm going to spoil the book for you.
Okay.
A guy who travels back in time, builds a time machine to meet Jesus, and then he learns that Jesus is just like this club-footed idiot, like mentally challenged, like can't talk, and it blows his mind. And then he realizes like the story of Jesus is so important for Western civilization. There's also a lot of talk about like archetypes from Jungian archetypes, which I don't really know anything about.
We need
But
Sumner
he
back on.
realizes like I have to preach the word of Jesus as I remember it as best as I can and become Jesus and be crucified in order for history to be on its right path. Because that's what is important. And history and time will take that message and turn it into what it needs to be. Similar idea there. I'm just drawing a conclusion. But
Yeah,
that idea is presented here very well.
it's presented very well, and I love when someone of the faith can have that kind of scene, that kind of commentary in this film, which is still, it's still very respectful. He's still trying to make a powerful portrait of Jesus within the film. It's so that definitely that scene honestly like pushed the movie over the edge for me to where I was like, yeah, this is great. But
Yeah. We also I want to go back, like, I think Mary Magdalene is his first wife, and she dies during childbirth, right?
no, she dies by divine intervention,
How does she die?
basically.
What what kills her?
Well, I mean, she sees that light and she smiles, and then she's just gone. She's dead.
Right. It is odd. I thought that was just like a metaphor for her going to heaven.
Well, it was like that's my first inclination that something's weird. Like even within his fantasy, he's still having to suffer for choosing this path.
Right. And then the supposed guardian angel says something. She's like, all women are the same. They have different faces, which makes you go like, something's up with this little girl.
Yeah, because that's a real incel thing to say.
So incel. All women are the same, man.
Yeah, just go find you another one.
Get a
Don't worry
trad
about it.
wife.
You can still have your happily ever after. Don't worry.
Sure.
Which,
But after that, after Paul, that's like second to last scene of the movie.
yeah,
Then we get to old Jesus, you know, dying of old age, which is its own thing.
which is
Um,
yeah, striking imagery within itself because
because you never see that.
yeah,
It's imagery that you don't see.
yeah,
Um, and like he's still filled with regret, you know.
yeah,
And then in an interesting reversal, they all of his while the temple's being like burned down and stuff around him, which is also striking imagery. You see fires off in the distance because apparently he lives like right next to the temple, I guess. Um, you see Judas is like accusing him of betraying God. You know,
yeah.
it's like, oh man, I've never seen this before. This is a complete reversal.
Yeah, it's like when Bedford Falls becomes Pottersville and It's a Wonderful Life.
Kind of, dude. It kind of is.
Yeah.
It's like the Jesus-y. It's a Wonderful Life. It's a Wonderful Life is a little Jesus-y, but
Yeah, and having him on his deathbed and having the apostles come in and kind of say their goodbyes, it's very like eerie. There's a
it's
very eerie vibe, and I'm like, yeah, something's wrong here. This is what is he planning to do? Like Jesus isn't just gonna die and that's it. Are they just gonna put him in a pauper's grave and kind of show that as like a I don't know, but
because
of
I yeah,
course.
because up until this point, you don't think the movie's going to end with like, and Jesus wasn't real. The end.
Scorsese comes on screen and says, "You're a fool if you thought he was real, dumbass." But no, but I got where it was going at this point. I really suspected. I was like, okay, this is one final test, and
A
when it
last temptation, if you will.
yeah, so when it cuts back to him on the cross, I knew that was coming. I was like, okay, this is all coming full circle. It totally worked for me. And it was like for his character and the way that it was built narratively within the script, it was powerful. And I was like, yeah, this is awesome. He overcame this final thing, even on the cross. To me, I was like, how the hell is this movie controversial if Jesus can overcome something like that? I don't know. I
Because the
wish people would
church, despite
just,
what it says, doesn't want us to see Jesus as human, because then that brings him down to earth and thus weakens their power over
whatever.
people.
It would have made me connect to him more, I think, growing up.
Yeah, well, that's why we're here now, talking about
Yeah.
talking the way we are and
Yeah.
thinking. Yeah. because I was into like Christian apologetics and reading that stuff and like questioning my faith in order to make it stronger. And then, it wound up here. But
Yeah.
no, it's to me, this movie was a lot of like the first 2 hours, mostly hits, some misses, very scene by scene, you know. And some of it I'm like, it was a greatest hits. I'm like, okay, this is kind of an interesting retelling, but like, what is this doing new, Like, and then those last 30 minutes are, I mean, that's pure cinema right there,
Yeah.
baby.
Cool pick. Happy Easter, everyone.
Happy Easter. Eat some ham, find some eggs. Easter Bunny is the Messiah.
Never cared much for Easter. Even like as a kid, it was like it wasn't as exciting as Christmas.
It's not, which is interesting. I always thought it was interesting. Like, the reason Christmas is important is that it let Easter happen. Easter is the bigger religious holiday,
It's
really.
the religious holiday. It should be like the
The-
biggest celebration.
right. It's bigger in like, I think some like Spanish and Latin American countries. They have like a whole week, but we just, because of gift giving, we got to we're American, so we got to commercialize Christmas
At
more.
Christmas, it's like, how many weeks can we get out of this? Like,
Yeah,
we're starting like before Thanksgiving.
dude, and it's yeah, it is weird because like, I mean, even Japan celebrates Christmas. They don't celebrate Easter. Doesn't make any sense.
Oh man. But when I was 5, I think, I got Pokemon the first movie in my Easter basket on VHS. Man, that was a good Easter.
That was good Easter, and we hope you have a happy Easter.
Yeah, thanks for watching, everybody. If you want to support us, there are many ways to do it. We have over 180 episodes of The Harbor. Go find another movie you like if you want. We like we said earlier, we have Goodfellas, we have King and Common if you want more Scorsese. I have if you want to hear me talk more about religion in kind of like a comedic way, you can go watch my video essay about religious films that were banned, or not religious films, films that were banned in my household growing up. And one of them is the Da Vinci Code, which I joke about and talk a little bit more about Mary Magdalene in there. So go check that out. We have stuff in the description. If you want to buy my book, you can. You can follow Scott at Scott K Comedy.
Got
Me
K
at the
Comedy on
Northern Line.
Instagram. If you want to hear me talk about religion, I have a joke about Michelangelo painting the Vatican. Uh,
There
sometimes
you
using
go.
my closer. There you go.
Thanks for listening, everybody. We will see you next week.